In a courtroom filled with laughter, a judge smirked as Keanu Reeves stood alone. No lawyer, no defense, just a stack of messy papers. Everyone thought he was finished. But behind his quiet eyes, a trap was waiting. What hidden strategy could turn humiliation into the most shocking courtroom reversal ever seen? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The Los Angeles Federal Courthouse was already overflowing by the time the case was called. Reporters had crammed into every available seat, pens and recorders ready, their whispers bouncing off the marble walls. Everyone had come to witness the clash between TechCorp Industries and Reeves Innovations, a battle that promised headlines and consequences far beyond the courtroom. Then the doors opened, and Keanu Reeves walked in. No lawyers surrounded him, no polished team of associates carried boxes of evidence on his behalf. He entered alone, a simple dark suit hanging loosely from his lean frame, his long hair tied back with the quiet neatness of a man who had dressed himself that morning without ceremony. In his hand, he carried a single, worn satchel, edges frayed, papers visibly crumpled inside. The murmurs began almost immediately. How could a man with his resources, a man who could afford the most formidable attorneys in the nation, stand here without representation? It seemed absurd. Some called it arrogance, others foolishness. Whatever it was, it set the tone. This trial would be unlike any other. At the bench sat Judge Margaret Thornhill, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with 3 decades of experience cutting through arrogance and pretension. She had seen billionaires, politicians, and stars parade through her courtroom. Some tried charm, others intimidation, none succeeded. She prided herself on being untouchable. She banged her gavel, the sharp sound silencing the room. "The court is now in session," she announced, her voice clear and edged with authority. "Case number 2032 CV 7945, TechCorp Industries versus Reeves Innovations." Her gaze shifted toward the defense table. She studied the solitary figure standing there and allowed herself a smirk. "Mr. Reeves," she said, almost with disbelief, "my records show you are representing yourself today. Is that correct?" All eyes turned. Keanu rose slowly, calm in his movements. He bowed his head respectfully. "Yes, Your Honor," he answered, his voice steady but soft. A ripple ran through the room, disbelief spreading like a wave. Some chuckled quietly, others shook their heads. Even the court reporter raised her brows, fingers pausing over the machine before resuming. From the plaintiff's side, Victor Dalton sat tall, his tailored suit gleaming under the lights. Dalton was TechCorp's prized attorney, charming, ruthless, and confident. He leaned toward his associates, the smirk on his face mirroring the judge's. A man standing alone against him would be an easy victory. Judge Thornhill's pen tapped against her desk. "A bold choice," she said flatly. "Very well, Mr. Dalton, you may begin." Dalton stood smoothly, commanding the courtroom as though it belonged to him. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clear and practiced, "this case is simple. TechCorp is the rightful innovator of this technology. Mr. Reeves has taken what does not belong to him. By the end of this trial, the facts will be undeniable." The lights dimmed slightly as a sleek presentation illuminated the screen behind him. Slides clicked in perfect sequence, patent dates, diagrams, timelines. His delivery was polished, precise, irresistible to a jury. Every point looked airtight. Judge Thornhill nodded along, taking notes. The jury leaned forward. Dalton had done this many times before, and it showed. When he finished, his final glance toward Keanu carried smug satisfaction. The judge turned. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Mr. Reeves, your opening statement." Keanu rose again, pulling wrinkled pages from his satchel. A sheet slipped to the floor. He bent to retrieve it, murmurs of laughter breaking out. Straightening, he shuffled the papers, searching for his place. "Your Honor," he began quietly, "I'm here because TechCorp is trying to take credit for what my team created." He hesitated, flipping through the stack. "The energy design uses a special coating that—" He stopped, frowned, muttered, "I have diagrams somewhere." The gallery chuckled openly now. Judge Thornhill's smirk deepened. "Mr. Reeves, this is not a film set. Do you have your evidence organized?" Keanu looked up at her, his face calm, his eyes unreadable. "I think so, Your Honor." Laughter rippled across the room. The laughter settled into low murmurs as Keanu continued fumbling with his papers. A juror shook his head slowly, another stifled a grin behind her hand. To them, this wasn't a defense. It was a performance gone wrong. Victor Dalton leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. He whispered something to his junior associate, who chuckled softly. The contrast between Dalton's flawless presentation and Keanu's scattered demeanor seemed almost cruel. For Dalton, this wasn't just about winning. It was about humiliating a man who dared to walk into a courtroom without the armor of legal expertise. Keanu finally found a page that looked familiar. "The coding," he said, pointing to a messy sketch, "isn't something TechCorp had. My team developed it, tested it, and—" His eyes scanned the sheet, but he stopped mid-sentence. "Sorry, I lost my place." The gallery erupted again, some covering their mouths to hide their amusement. The bailiff coughed, but even his stern face betrayed the edge of a smile. Judge Thornhill lifted a hand for silence, though her eyes sparkled with the same faint amusement. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her tone sharp but not without a trace of mockery, "patent law is not a place for improvisation. You should know that evidence must be precise and properly presented." Keanu gave a small nod. "Yes, Your Honor." He adjusted the wrinkled sheets, his fingers steady despite the noise around him. "I'll manage." But Dalton couldn't resist. He rose slightly, addressing the judge with a feigned tone of courtesy. "Your Honor, perhaps we should consider whether this defense meets the basic requirements of the court. My client deserves a proper case, not disorganized rambling." The gallery tittered again. Judge Thornhill raised an eyebrow, then looked down at Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, I strongly suggest you take these proceedings seriously. If you are not prepared, you could face significant consequences." Keanu met her gaze for the first time, his eyes calm, unreadable. "I understand, Your Honor." For a flicker of a second, something shifted in the room. His words carried no panic, no desperation, only a quiet certainty. But the moment passed quickly, drowned by the weight of Dalton's smirk and the murmurs of a courtroom already convinced. When Keanu sat down, he arranged his papers into a messy stack, pen resting lightly between his fingers. Outwardly, he looked overwhelmed. Inwardly, no one yet realized, he was taking in every detail. The timing of Dalton's arguments, the rhythm of the judge's questions, the way the jury reacted to each point. Behind the appearance of confusion, his eyes flickered with silent calculation. And though almost everyone in the room laughed at him that morning, none would be laughing for long. The fume of the projector still lingered as Dalton switched off his presentation. The jurors shuffled their notes, impressed by the seamless logic of his argument. Judge Thornhill gave a curt nod of approval, her smirk returning as she looked at Keanu. "Mr. Reeves," she said evenly, "if that concludes your opening, we will proceed with the plaintiff's evidence." Keanu remained standing for a moment too long, as though searching for something more to say. Then he gathered his crumpled papers and lowered himself back into his chair. From the back row, Maya Lin, his lead engineer, shifted uncomfortably. She twisted her hands together, her eyes moving from Dalton's confident stride to Keanu's still figure. To her, it felt like watching a man walk into a storm without an umbrella. Dalton, already rising again, addressed the court. "Your Honor, TechCorp is ready to present its first piece of evidence." He gestured, and two associates wheeled in neat boxes labeled with colored tabs. Their movements were rehearsed, efficient, professional. Everything about TechCorp radiated control. In contrast, Keanu's table looked barren. Just a satchel, a half-empty water bottle, and a pile of loose sheets. To anyone watching, the case seemed hopelessly unbalanced. Judge Thornhill glanced once more at Keanu, almost pitying him. "Very well, Mr. Dalton, proceed." Dalton flashed a satisfied smile before turning to the jury. His voice carried confidence, his gestures crisp. He was the picture of a lawyer in command of his courtroom. The audience leaned forward eagerly, convinced they already knew the outcome. But at the defense table, Keanu Reeves sat silently, his head bowed, his pen resting against the margin of his notes. To the world, he looked defeated. Only in the faint flicker of his eyes was there a different truth. An unseen calculation building beneath the surface. The courtroom laughed at him now. Soon, they would not. 6 months before the trial, the air inside Keanu Reeves's small studio lab was thick with quiet tension. The space looked nothing like the polished facilities of major corporations. It was modest, almost Spartan. Bare concrete floors, steel shelving stacked with cables and spare parts, and a single workbench cluttered with tools. Yet in this simple place, something extraordinary was about to happen. Maya Lin, a young engineer with sharp eyes and boundless energy, crouched over a device no larger than a shoebox. The box itself looked unimpressive, a brushed metal casing with faint seams and tiny wires trailing from its sides. To an outsider, it might appear like a student's half-finished project, but Maya's hands trembled as she adjusted the tablet connected to it, her pulse racing with anticipation. Keanu stood beside her, his tall frame steady, his gaze fixed on the box. He wore no lab coat, no pretense of grandeur, just a black t-shirt and jeans. His calm presence contrasted Maya's nervous excitement, but even in his stillness, his eyes carried a spark. This was the culmination of years of trial and error, late nights and quiet sacrifices. "Are we ready?" he asked softly. Maya nodded quickly. Final calibration set. "If this works, it should hold steady." "Run it," Keanu said. Maya tapped the screen. At first, nothing happened. Then, faintly, a line of blue light traced itself along the edges of the box. The glow brightened, steady and constant, spreading like breath beneath the metal skin. The hum of power filled the air. Not loud, but deep, resonant, like the sound of potential itself awakening. Maya gasped, her eyes glued to the readings. 98% efficiency, she whispered. She looked again, almost disbelieving. "Keanu, that's 3 times better than anything else in the market. 3 times. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Maya broke into a grin, her voice trembling with awe. "Keanu, this changes everything." His expression didn't shift dramatically. He wasn't one for displays of excitement, but his eyes softened and the faintest smile touched his lips. If it works at scale, it could free people from power grids. Imagine. Homes powered for a month on something the size of this box. Cars running thousands of miles without refueling. Whole towns without fear of outages. Maya's grin widened, the weight of the achievement pressing into her chest. "We did it," she breathed. "We actually did it." Keanu reached out, resting a steady hand on the box, feeling the quiet vibration beneath his palm. For him, this wasn't just about technology. It was about freedom, about giving ordinary people control over energy, about breaking the grip of corporations that profited from dependence. He had lived long enough to know how fragile stability could be. This invention was more than circuits and coatings. It was a chance to change lives. The glow continued to pulse steadily, proof that their years of persistence had not been wasted. Maya's voice shook with emotion. We're going to change the world. But Keanu's gaze stayed measured, already aware that success drew shadows. We'll have to protect it, he murmured. And almost as if the universe were listening, the knock came at the lab's entrance. Maya looked up, startled. Who would be here at this hour? Keanu didn't move immediately. His instincts tightened, a sense of intrusion washing over him. Finally, he stepped away from the bench and walked to the door. When he opened it, the figure standing there made Maya's stomach twist. Edward Halston, CEO of Tech Corp, filled the doorway. Immaculately dressed, smile too wide, handshake too firm, he carried himself like a man accustomed to owning every room he entered. "I'm on." "Keanu," Halston said warmly, as though greeting an old friend. "I'm glad to finally see what you've been working on." Maya froze when she heard the man's voice. Edward Halston was the last person she expected to see standing in their doorway. He wasn't just any executive. He was the face of Tech Corp, a company notorious for swallowing smaller innovators whole. Keanu's posture remained calm, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Edward, I wasn't expecting you." Halston stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor. Two assistants trailed behind him, each holding tablets, their eyes scanning the lab with calculated interest. Halston gave the space a sweeping glance, his smile growing. "I like it. Simple, focused, very authentic. It's always in places like this where the real magic happens." Maya's jaw tightened. She wanted to snap that this was private property, that he had no right to stroll in as though he owned the place. But Keanu gave her a subtle shake of the head, signaling restraint. "Shake? What brings you here?" Keanu asked evenly. Halston clasped his hands together as if delivering good news. "I've heard whispers, breakthrough whispers. TechCorp wants to partner with you, Keanu. You've always had vision, but let's be honest, you don't have the infrastructure, manufacturing, global distribution, marketing. We can take your idea and bring it to the world at scale. Together, we'd be unstoppable." Maya shot Keanu a wary look. She whispered sharply, "He's fishing. You know their history?" Halston glanced at her with a polite nod, as if acknowledging a child's interruption, then turned back to Keanu. "I'm not here to steal. I'm here to elevate. Let me see what you're working on, and I'll show you exactly what TechCorp can do for you." Keanu studied him, silent for a long moment. He knew TechCorp's reputation, how smaller labs vanished after signing partnerships, their ideas quietly absorbed and rebranded. Yet he also knew refusing outright would make Halston hungrier. "A quick tour," Keanu said finally, his voice calm but firm. "But some areas are off-limits." Halston's smile widened, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of disappointment. "Of course, I respect boundaries." As they walked, Maya's unease grew. She caught sight of one of Halston's assistants angling a tablet suspiciously, the faint click of a hidden camera capturing details when they thought no one was looking. Keanu noticed too. He didn't speak, but the tightening of his jaw said enough. Something dangerous had just been invited into their sanctuary. Halston moved slowly through the lab, his polished smile fixed, but his eyes darted everywhere. He lingered at shelves that held nothing but discarded prototypes, picked up tools as if inspecting them for clues, and nodded with exaggerated admiration at every piece of equipment. "You've always had a gift, Keanu," he said, voice smooth as glass. "But gifts like these need the right kind of protection. Competition is brutal. Without strong allies, even the brightest flame can be snuffed out." Maya trailed behind, arms crossed, her distrust plain. She caught sight of the other assistant holding his tablet low, angling it toward one of their circuit boards. The faint flash of a hidden lens betrayed him. "Stop that," Maya snapped, her voice cut sharply through the room. The assistant stammered, pretending to adjust settings, but Keanu had already stepped between them. His calm tone never wavered. Photographs aren't part of this tour, he said. Halston raised his hands in mock surrender. Relax, just curiosity. My people are enthusiastic, that's all. His smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes hardened, an impatience, a hunger barely masked. When they reached the heavy door to the restricted lab, Keanu stopped. He placed his hand on the handle, but didn't open it. This area stays closed, he said firmly. Halston's smile flickered, then returned. Of course, I wouldn't dream of overstepping. But his gaze lingered on the door a moment too long, and Maya saw it. The frustration of being denied, the calculation already beginning in his head. They walked him back toward the entrance. Halston extended his hand, his voice booming with confidence. I've seen enough to know we could do great things together. Expect my people to call yours. Keanu shook his hand, grip steady, eyes steady. We'll see. When the door closed behind Halston and his entourage, the silence in the lab was heavy. Maya turned immediately, her voice sharp with anger. We can't trust him. You saw what they were doing. They're here to steal, not partner. Keanu looked back toward the restricted lab, his expression unreadable. I know, he said quietly. His voice carried no surprise, only inevitability. He walked back to the humming prototype, its blue glow steady and strong. He rested his hand on it once more, as though grounding himself. A storm was coming, and he already knew they would have to fight harder than ever to protect what they had built. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds of Keanu's office, casting thin stripes of light across the papers scattered on his desk. The prototype still hummed faintly in the corner, running low-level stability tests. It had become almost like background music, constant, reassuring. But that reassurance was about to shatter. The door burst open. Maya rushed inside, her face pale with fury, clutching a thick folder of printed documents. She slammed it onto the desk so hard that a stack of notes toppled over. They did it, she said, her voice shaking. They actually filed. Keanu looked up slowly, calm as ever, though his eyes sharpened when they met hers. Filed what? Maya shoved the folder toward him and flipped it open. Inside were printouts of TechCorp's official patent filing, stamped, signed, already making its way through the approval process. The diagrams, the specifications, the terminology, it was all there, and it was theirs. The design was nearly identical to the one humming quietly in their lab. They copied everything, Maya hissed. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages. The structure, the nano-coding, even the testing protocols. Word for word, Keanu. They didn't even bother to hide it. Keanu leaned forward, studying the diagrams. His face remained still, but his silence weighed heavy. He traced a finger along one of the lines on the blueprint, then closed the folder gently. I knew this would happen, he said softly. Maya stared at him, disbelief flashing across her face. You knew? And you didn't stop them? We should have filed first, or at least locked down protections. Now they're going to claim it's theirs, and the world will believe them. Keanu sat back, folding his hands together. We couldn't have stopped them. Halston came here for a reason. He saw enough to reconstruct what we were building. This is how TechCorp works. They steal and then wrap it in paperwork. They believe they own the law as much as the technology. Maya's voice cracked, frustration boiling over. Then fight them with the law. Hire lawyers, real ones, the best in the country. We can't stand against this alone. Keanu shook his head slowly, the calmness in his demeanor almost infuriating. That's exactly what they expect us to do. They'll be ready for that fight, stacked with their own armies of attorneys. If I play their game, I lose before it begins. Maya's hands clenched at her sides. Then what's your plan? Just sit here while they take everything? Keanu's gaze softened. He reached for the folder again, flipping it open, and tapped the top page. No, I'm going to fight them. But not with their lawyers, not with their rules. They'll expect me to hire someone, They won't expect me. Maya blinked, her frustration mixing with confusion. You? Represent yourself? Keanu, that's reckless. You don't know the law, not like they do. This isn't a movie where you improvise a speech and the jury applauds. This is federal court. Keanu's lips curved faintly at the corners, but there was no humor in his expression. Then I'll learn the law. I'll study it until I know it better than they do, and when the time comes, I'll use it against them. Maya shook her head, half angry, half fearful. That's insane. You'll drown in the details before you even get close. But Keanu had already pulled a notebook from his desk drawer, its pages blank, waiting. He set it down in front of him, opened it, and began to write. Keanu sat motionless for a moment, letting the silence expand until it became uncomfortable for everyone in the room. His stillness was not weakness, it was control. Then he stood, gathering the papers with deliberate calm, as if arranging pieces on a chessboard. The smirks from the opposing table began to fade, replaced with curiosity. Something about the way he moved, the patience in his hands, suggested he wasn't scrambling at all. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the courtroom without strain. "Your Honor," he began, "before we continue, may I ask that the opposing counsel read aloud Exhibit B, line by line?" The request seemed odd, almost naive, and the lawyer scoffed but complied. He leaned forward, confident, reading with exaggerated flair. But halfway through, his tone faltered. A single phrase leapt from the page, a clause that contradicted their entire argument. The courtroom murmured. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply asked, "Did you notice that?" The lawyer's face flushed crimson. The judge, now alert, adjusted his glasses and requested the document. A hush swept over the room as the judge scanned it, his smirk fading into a frown. The trap had been set days earlier, long before Keanu walked through the courthouse doors. Every so-called messy page in his stack was marked with subtle notes, each referencing overlooked flaws in the opposition's filings. He hadn't come unprepared. He had come waiting. Keanu's calm explanation unfolded like a story rather than a rebuttal. He walked the judge and jury step by step through contradictions that had been hidden in plain sight. With each revelation, the opposing counsel squirmed deeper in their chair, their earlier confidence collapsing under the weight of neglected detail. By the time Keanu returned to his seat, the silence was no longer his to carry. It belonged to the courtroom itself, an air thick with disbelief, tension, and a creeping recognition that the man everyone had mocked might just rewrite the ending they assumed was already written. The silence that fell over the courtroom was almost unbearable. Reporters shifted in their seats, cameras clicked faintly, and the opposing lawyer cleared his throat as if to break the tension. But Keanu did not rush. He let the quiet grow until even the judge seemed uncomfortable, tapping his gavel lightly, as though to remind everyone this was still a court of law. Finally, Keanu lifted his gaze, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, I may not be a lawyer, but I do know truth. And truth doesn't need fancy language or long speeches. It only needs courage to be spoken." He placed the papers down on the table in front of him with deliberate care. Then, with steady hands, he pulled out one document from the stack. The seal on the corner caught the light. The crowd leaned forward. "This," Keanu said, "is a certified record. It shows exactly what happened that day, and it tells a very different story than the one being told here." The arrogant lawyer scoffed, but there was a crack in his smile now, a twitch in his jaw that betrayed unease. He tried to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand. Let him continue. Keanu handed the document to the bailiff, who brought it to the bench. The judge adjusted his glasses and began to read. The room waited. Every breath felt suspended in the air. As the judge's eyes moved across the page, the smirk disappeared from his face. He frowned, reading it twice, then 3 times, as though trying to be sure what he was seeing was real. He looked up, his voice heavier now. "Counselor, is this accurate?" The lawyer stammered, his confidence faltering. "Your Honor, I would need time to review that material. This is highly irregular." "Not irregular," Keanu cut in gently. "Just inconvenient for those who hoped the truth would stay buried." A murmur swept through the gallery. The reporters scrambled to jot down every word, sensing a story far bigger than the case itself. The judge exhaled slowly, his gavel tapping once more. "Proceed. Mr. Reeves, you may continue." Keanu gave a small nod, as if to acknowledge the gravity of what had just shifted. He picked up the next paper from his pile. His voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it now. "For months, they told me I was out of my depth. They said I didn't belong here. Maybe they're right about one thing. I don't belong in a place where justice is treated like a game. But I do belong here if the truth matters. And I won't walk away until every piece of it is laid bare." The room seemed to pulse with anticipation. The lawyer who had mocked him earlier was sweating visibly, his arrogance slipping away. And Keanu, once underestimated and ridiculed, stood taller now. Not as an actor playing a role, but as a man whose quiet strength had just turned the entire courtroom on its head. The courtroom lights glared down as Victor Dalton rose from his chair, the confident smile already stretching across his face. He buttoned his suit jacket, lifted a stack of neatly arranged notes, and strolled to the center of the floor. Every step carried the certainty of a man who believed the outcome was already written. "Your Honor," he began, his voice resonant, crisp, rehearsed. "We will show beyond a shadow of a doubt that TechCorp Industries was the original innovator of the energy design in question. Reeves Innovations did not invent it. They copied it. And by the end of today, this court will see the undeniable proof." He gestured toward the large digital screen. It flickered to life, displaying timelines, diagrams, and official documents stamped with authority. Dates appeared in bold red letters, each one placed strategically to suggest TechCorp's progress long before Keanu's. Dalton walked the jury through each slide like a professor teaching a simple lesson, his tone patient but commanding. "This," he said, pointing to a slide of early sketches, "was filed 6 months before Mr. Reeves claimed his device existed. These," he continued, shifting to a diagram of energy cells, "were independently tested in TechCorp facilities. And here," he paused for effect, "is the patent submission filed in accordance with federal law, the culmination of years of work." He turned to the judge with a nod of respect, then faced the jury again. "TechCorp did not steal, it created. Reeves Innovations is attempting to take credit for something it never produced." As he spoke, the witnesses were called. Engineers from TechCorp, executives with polished smiles, all sworn in and eager to bolster Dalton's narrative. One by one, they testified that they had been part of the development team for years, describing experiments, failed prototypes, and eventual breakthroughs. Their testimony was smooth, practiced, coordinated. Each reinforced the timeline Dalton had painted. Keanu sat quietly at the defense table, his expression unreadable. His stack of wrinkled papers lay untouched. Maya sat behind him, her hands twisting nervously in her lap, her heart pounding harder with every polished answer given by the witnesses. She could see the jury leaning forward, nodding, taking notes. Dalton's case was building like a fortress, each brick laid with precision. Finally, Keanu rose for his first objection. His voice was calm, but unpolished. "Your Honor, this testimony—" "Objection overruled," Judge Thornhill interrupted sharply before he could finish. "Stay within procedure, Mr. Reeves." He tried again moments later, when another witness confidently described the nanocoating process. "Your Honor, that's not accurate." "Overruled," the judge said again, cutting him off. The gallery chuckled. A few reporters whispered to one another, already drafting stories that would describe this as a disaster for the actor-turned-inventor who had dared to step into court without legal training. Keanu lowered himself back into his chair, not flustered, not angry, just still. His gaze shifted to the far wall, focusing on something unseen, as though he were assembling a puzzle in his mind. To the casual eye, he looked defeated. To Maya, he looked distant. But behind the calm mask, a different battle was already unfolding. Keanu stood motionless, his hands folded loosely in front of him. The quietness in his presence seemed almost defiant against the noise that had just filled the room. A young intern carrying a tray of files bumped into a bench, scattering papers. The sound echoed like a gavel crack. Yet Keanu didn't flinch. He simply waited. The judge cleared his throat, clearly irritated. "Mr. Reeves, are you representing yourself in this matter?" Keanu nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom broke again into muffled laughter. One of the jurors even shook his head in disbelief, whispering to the woman beside him. The lawyer across the aisle, Douglas Finch, leaned on the polished wood of the defense table, eyes gleaming. "Your Honor," Finch began, his voice smooth with practiced confidence, "this is highly irregular. We're dealing with a multi-million-dollar contract dispute. For an actor, however successful, to think he can stroll in here without counsel is," he gestured dramatically toward Keanu, "beyond naive. I move that the court recommend he acquire proper representation, or we will be wasting everyone's time." The jab cut deep through the air, yet Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he bent slightly, gathered a single folder from the pile he had brought, and placed it neatly on the table before him. His calmness contrasted so sharply with Finch's condescension that a ripple of curiosity flickered through the audience. Finally, Keanu lifted his eyes. "With respect, Your Honor, I am fully aware of the gravity of this case, and I intend to speak for myself. No one knows these details as closely as I do." His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical, but its steady cadence carried across the courtroom with unexpected weight. For a moment, even Finch's smirk faltered. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, considering. "Very well, but Mr. Reeves, be advised, this court will not tolerate any grandstanding. You are expected to follow legal procedure." Keanu gave a short nod. "Understood." The proceedings resumed, and immediately Finch pounced. He strutted to the center, his designer suit catching the overhead lights, and began pacing like a predator. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you are about to witness is not a case of broken promises or lost opportunity. It is, instead, an elaborate act by an actor who confuses fantasy with law." The courtroom chuckled again. Finch thrived on it, his every pause orchestrated for effect. He painted Keanu as careless, as someone attempting to dodge responsibility for contracts his own team had signed. His words rolled like thunder, confident and sharp, and each one felt designed not just to prove a case, but to humiliate. And yet, as Finch spoke, Keanu quietly began flipping through his papers, highlighting passages with a steady hand. Not once did he interrupt. Not once did he falter. His composure suggested something no one expected. That maybe, just maybe, the laughter wouldn't last forever. Keanu let his gaze sweep the table one last time, studying each face, weighing each expression. The silence that followed the revelation wasn't just awkward, it was suffocating, as if the air itself carried the weight of centuries-old secrets. For a man accustomed to stage lights, cameras, and the world's attention, he found this quiet far more overwhelming. Finally, Keanu set his fork down and leaned back, his voice calm but unshakable. "You tried to bury her," he said softly, "but she grew roots you couldn't tear out." His eyes locked on the matriarch, who fidgeted with the hem of her silk sleeve, unable to meet his gaze. Across the table, One of the younger cousins whispered, "I didn't know." His words trembled, almost drowned by the clinking of glasses as a servant nervously cleared plates. "You weren't supposed to know," Keanu replied, his tone neither harsh nor forgiving. "Just true. But now you do, and truth has a way of demanding to be seen." The patriarch's jaw clenched, but his shoulders slumped ever so slightly, betraying the years of effort it had taken to keep the family's illusions intact. "It was simpler this way," he muttered, almost to himself. "Simpler for you," Keanu countered. "Not for her, not for me." The firelight flickered against his features, casting shadows that made him look both older and stronger, as though this moment had etched a deeper resolve into his being. Around him, the grandeur of the dining hall seemed suddenly hollow, the crystal, the chandeliers, the polished silver, all meaningless trappings compared to the raw honesty now burning in the room. Slowly, Keanu rose from his seat. The scrape of the chair against marble echoed like a warning bell. "This dinner," he said, his words steady, "was meant to humiliate me. But it's done something else. It's revealed you." With that, he placed his napkin on the table and turned away, the weight of the family's stares pressing against his back. Some were filled with shame, others with fear, but none could look away. As he reached the massive doors, Keanu paused, his voice carrying across the hall one final time. "Legacies built on lies eventually crumble. I won't be part of yours." And then he walked out, leaving behind not just the meal, but the entire pretense of their power. The apartment didn't look like much from the outside. It was a small, rented office space tucked above a dry cleaner's shop, just a few blocks from the courthouse. The kind of place no one would notice, no one would question. But inside, the space had been transformed into something extraordinary. The walls were no longer bare. They were lined with whiteboards, floor to ceiling, each one crammed with writing that looked like the frenzied scrawl of a mathematician and a detective combined. Dates stretched in long timelines linking names and events. Arrows pointed from legal references to case numbers, citations underlined twice. Whole sections were circled in red, with bold words like Trap A and Counterpoint 3 written above them. To the untrained eye, it might have looked chaotic. To Keanu, it was a map, an evolving strategy to dismantle TechCorp's entire case, piece by piece. At the center of the room sat Keanu himself, cross-legged on the floor, a notebook open on his lap. His hair hung loose around his shoulders, his black t-shirt wrinkled from days of sleepless nights. He stared at one particular whiteboard with unblinking focus, lips moving soundlessly as he rehearsed arguments. The stack of legal textbooks at his side bore signs of heavy use, pages marked with sticky notes, spines cracked, entire paragraphs underlined in pencil. On the desk across the room, his laptop glowed. A grainy security feed played on the screen. Keanu leaned forward, pausing the footage. It was from the night Edward Halston had visited the lab. The image showed one of Halston's assistants tilting his tablet at a circuit board, snapping a covert photo. Keanu zoomed in, frame by frame, until the reflection of the device was visible in the glass of a nearby cabinet. The angle revealed enough. The assistant had taken dozens of images in secret. Keanu exhaled slowly. "There it is," he whispered. Proof that TechCorp hadn't just invented their story, but stolen it. Maya entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She set one beside him and looked at the wall of writing with wide, exhausted eyes. "You've been at this for 3 nights straight," she said softly. "You can't keep this pace, Keanu." He didn't answer right away. He tapped his pencil against the board, circling a date. Finally, he looked at her, his expression calm but intense. "They built their case on appearances. If we want to win, we need more than words. We need something they can't deny." Maya followed his gaze to the corner of the room. There, half covered with a cloth, sat a strange device. Wires protruded from the casing, circuits gleaming under the lamp. She frowned. "What is that?" Keanu stood and crossed to it. Pulling the cloth aside, he revealed a compact version of their prototype, reassembled into a sleek demonstration model. He checked the connections, tightened a screw, then stepped back. "This," he said quietly, "is our truth. They can argue patents and papers, but they can't argue with proof that works in front of their eyes." Maya folded her arms, worry shadowing her face. "And if the court doesn't let you show it?" Keanu gave a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Then I'll find a way." Keanu sat in the corner of the dimly lit office, the unopened letter still resting on the desk like a sealed vault of pain. The night outside had grown heavier, pressing against the window panes with the weight of silence. A part of him longed to tear it open and release whatever truth lay hidden, but another part trembled at the possibility of words that could undo everything he thought he knew about his past. The hotel's creaks and whispers seemed amplified in the stillness. Every sound reminded him of the building's long memory, as though the walls themselves carried stories left untold. His fingers hovered over the envelope, tracing the faint indent of a name he recognized: his mother's. The handwriting was delicate, deliberate, almost tender, as though the writer had poured not only ink, but fragments of their own soul onto the page. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Images of his mother flooded his mind. Her soft smile when she tucked him in as a child, the way her eyes held both strength and sorrow, as if she bore secrets even then. Could this letter explain the shadow that sometimes fell across her expression? Or was it something entirely different? Something that would shatter the fragile balance he had built from memory. Keanu reached for the letter, but his hand stalled midair. Fear gnawed at him. He had faced down villains on screen, endured the loss of people he loved in real life. Yet this small, folded piece of paper felt more dangerous than any of it. It carried the weight of origin, of identity, and once read, it could never be unread. He stood and paced the room. The floor groaned beneath his boots, echoing the unease inside him. He thought of the years he had spent searching for belonging, drifting from city to city, finding fragments of family in unexpected places. What if this letter revealed that his entire foundation, his name, his blood, his story, was not what he believed? The question pressed harder the longer he avoided it. Finally, with a trembling breath, he sat again. He slid his finger beneath the seal, hesitating one last time before pulling it open. The paper crackled softly as he unfolded it, the sound almost reverent. The first words blurred before his eyes, and he had to blink back the sting of sudden tears. "My dearest son." He froze, the world narrowing to that phrase. It wasn't his mother's handwriting on the inside. It was someone else's voice reaching through time, someone who had chosen to write directly to him. His heart pounded as he read on, each sentence a thread unraveling a story long buried. The words hinted at sacrifices, at choices made in desperation. They spoke of a love denied by circumstance, a truth hidden for protection. By the second paragraph, Keanu's chest tightened so fiercely it hurt to breathe. He realized this wasn't just a letter. It was a confession, a revelation that could change everything. The first morning on the global stage felt like the world had shifted beneath Keanu's feet. Overnight, social media feeds lit up with the image of him standing beside Isabella, both framed against the backdrop of the ruined house that had started it all. Headlines spread like wildfire. Actor Keanu Reeves honors his mother's past with global appeal, and Hollywood star turns personal discovery into humanitarian mission. But fame wasn't the point. For Keanu, the focus was on what came next. Cameras captured him addressing a sea of microphones outside the modest town hall, his voice steady yet tinged with the kind of vulnerability that couldn't be rehearsed. He didn't speak about movies or money. Instead, he spoke about memory, about how stories buried in the walls of a house could shape generations, and about the quiet resilience of families like Isabella's. His words cut through the noise of politics and entertainment, reaching into living rooms across continents. Parents paused, children listened, veterans of hardship nodded. The message was not of charity, but of recognition, of restoring dignity to the forgotten. Isabella stood beside him, her presence a living testimony to the truth he was lifting into the light. Within days, donations began flooding in, not because Keanu had asked for them, but because people felt compelled. A relief fund named the House of Memory was established, its symbol a simple sketch of the old home that had once hidden a girl's tears and a mother's courage. The fund went on to rebuild crumbling houses for families who had no voice, turning private tragedy into collective strength. Yet the impact went beyond money. Letters poured in from survivors of forgotten wars, from displaced workers, from children growing up in fractured households. Each one seemed to say, "Thank you for reminding us we matter." Keanu read them late into the night, sometimes setting one down with tears in his eyes. Isabella, too, found herself flooded with letters, some written by women who saw their own lives reflected in her story. The global stage was no longer just about Keanu Reeves, the actor. It was about humanity reclaiming its stories. And as Keanu walked through the crowds of journalists, children, and old neighbors from his mother's town, he felt the weight of that responsibility, but also its beauty. For once, the spotlight wasn't harsh. It was a lantern, illuminating corners of the world left too long in the dark. When he turned back to the house one last time that week, its broken windows catching the morning sun, Keanu knew it had become more than ruins. It had become a symbol of what happens when the truth, no matter how buried, is finally spoken aloud. And as Isabella slipped her hand into his, whispering that she finally felt free, Keanu realized the global stage wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about connection. And connection, once awakened, could change the world. The courtroom felt heavier when the bailiff called the session back into order. After the chaotic first day, whispers rippled through the gallery, speculation mixing with amusement. To most, the case seemed all but decided. Keanu Reeves looked tired, ill-prepared, and hopelessly outmatched. Victor Dalton, on the other hand, sat sharp and collected, waiting with the confidence of a man who believed he was about to deliver the decisive blow. Dalton rose with his signature flourish, buttoning his jacket as he turned toward the jury. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "the plaintiff calls Dr. Charles Monroe to the stand." A tall man with thinning silver hair and a measured gait entered. His glasses glinted under the courtroom lights, and his tailored suit carried the quiet authority of someone used to being taken seriously. Monroe was not just any witness. He was TechCorp's head of research and development, the man credited with guiding their most ambitious projects. He was sworn in, settled into the witness chair, and looked directly at the jury with calm assurance. Dalton stepped forward. "Dr. Monroe, could you tell the court your position at TechCorp?" "I am the Senior Vice President of Research and Development," Monroe replied, his voice deep, steady, almost professorial. "I oversee the direction and execution of all major projects within the company." "And how long have you held this position?" 17 years. Dalton nodded as though the answer were a triumph in itself. "Now, Doctor, I want to direct your attention to the technology in question. How long has TechCorp been working on this design?" Monroe folded his hands. 18 months. We began initial development well before Mr. Reeves claims his prototype was completed. Our process was rigorous, documented, and reviewed at multiple levels. We conducted over 50 independent tests during that period. Dalton paced slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "And the results?" "The results," Monroe said with the faintest smile, "were successful. We achieved stability and efficiency benchmarks consistent with what is now being presented as Reeves Innovations work. In truth, Those benchmarks were reached in our labs long before Mr. Reeves claims his so-called breakthrough. A low murmur stirred in the gallery. The jurors scribbled notes. Dalton turned back toward them, arms spread as if to say, "See?" He didn't need to embellish. Monroe's calm authority did the work for him. When Dalton finished his direct examination, he turned toward Keanu with a smirk that bordered on pity. "Your witness." Keanu rose slowly, shuffling his stack of papers. He approached the witness stand, his movements unhurried, almost hesitant. "Dr. Monroe," he began quietly, "you've been with Tech Corp for many years?" "That is correct." "And your work is well respected?" "Yes." Keanu flipped through his papers, frowned, then glanced up. "That's all I have." A ripple of laughter filled the room. One juror coughed to hide a grin. Dalton chuckled openly. Judge Thornhill's face tightened as she leaned forward. "Mr. Reeves, this is cross-examination. Do not waste the court's time." "Yes, Your Honor," Keanu said, his tone humble. He returned to his seat, seemingly beaten. But as the laughter subsided, Judge Thornhill noticed something peculiar. While the actor's performance had looked clumsy, his pen moved with quiet precision across the margin of his notes. His eyes flicked between his scrawled writing and the witness stand, his face calm, unreadable. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. The day of the ceremony was over, yet the resonance of it carried on like a quiet echo in Keanu's mind. He found himself wandering through the empty streets after everyone had left, still dressed in his simple suit, the metal box tucked securely under his arm. The city felt strangely alive, as if it had absorbed the emotion of the evening, the cheers, the tears, the weight of history finally acknowledged. Each step reminded him of the responsibility he now carried, not just to Tony's memory, but to everyone who had ever been overlooked, forgotten, or left waiting for justice that never came. Back in his home, Keanu placed the medal on the mantel. For a long while, he just stared at it. It wasn't flashy, wasn't oversized, yet it seemed to radiate something profound. It was more than a piece of metal. It was a symbol of sacrifice, humility, and the unspoken bond between soldiers who carried each other through the darkest hours. In that still moment, he realized that honoring Tony wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The next morning, he started making calls, not to studios, not to producers, but to veterans groups, hospitals, and advocacy networks. He asked questions, offered support, and listened more than he spoke. The story of Tony had cracked open something inside him, something that refused to go back to sleep. He couldn't erase decades of neglect, but he could shine light on stories buried under dust and silence. Soon, word spread. Families of veterans began writing to him, sharing stories of their fathers, brothers, and grandfathers who had never been honored. Some sent letters filled with trembling handwriting, others emails full of photos faded by time. Each one was a reminder that Tony was not alone. He was one face among countless others whose sacrifices deserved remembrance. Keanu began traveling quietly, attending small gatherings, listening to widows, children, and surviving veterans share their truths. He didn't do it for cameras or headlines. He did it because every story mattered. And as he listened, he noticed something remarkable. He wasn't just carrying Tony's legacy anymore. He was carrying all of them, stitching together pieces of forgotten history into a quilt of honor and memory. The room seemed to expand as Isabella shared her memories. Each painting became a doorway, each sketch a diary. Keanu found himself drifting into a silence that was not empty but full of the weight of untold stories, of nights spent painting to stay sane, of mornings when hope felt like the only meal Isabella could afford. He glanced at his mother, who was still seated, her eyes closed as if listening not to Isabella's words, but to the echoes of her own childhood. The connection between the two women, though separated by decades and fate, was undeniable. Then Isabella pulled out a canvas wrapped in old brown paper. With trembling hands, she revealed a painting of a young girl with wide eyes and a hopeful smile. "This," she whispered, "was your mother the day she left this house. I painted it from memory the morning after." Keanu leaned closer. The likeness was uncanny. The same softness in the eyes, the same quiet courage etched across the child's face. His mother let out a sob that broke the air, fragile yet piercing. "I never knew," she murmured, reaching out as if to touch the child she once was. Isabella's voice trembled. "I kept this hidden. It was my way of keeping her alive, even when I thought I would never see her again." Keanu's chest tightened. He realized this was more than art. It was survival, love, and memory bound together in oil and canvas. He stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Isabella's shoulder. "This," he said softly, "is not just a painting. It's a bridge you kept alive all these years." The room fell into stillness again, but it was no longer heavy. It was alive with a strange, fragile peace, like the calm after a storm. For the first time, Keanu's mother smiled through her tears. Isabella closed her eyes, her hand still resting on the frame, and whispered, "Then my waiting wasn't in vain." In that moment, the past and present seemed to fold into one, and Keanu knew that what they had uncovered in this studio was not just history, it was healing. The city outside slept, but Keanu's rented apartment, Cassia, was alive with the hum of fluorescent lights and the rustle of papers. Midnight had come and gone, yet the whiteboards were still crowded with red and black scrawls, timelines running like veins across the walls. The room smelled faintly of cold coffee and dry erase markers, the tools of their desperate preparation. Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by folders, her hair tied back in a loose knot. Her eyes burned from hours of scanning documents, but her hands refused to stop turning pages. Across from her, Keanu hunched over his desk, his pen gliding across another legal pad, lines of strategy and counter-arguments filling the margins. The silence was broken only by the faint buzz of the laptop fan until Maya suddenly drew in a sharp breath. "Wait, Keanu, look at this." She spun her chair toward him and pulled up a video file. It was grainy security footage from their lab, dated the night of Edward Halston's visit. The frame showed the hallway outside the restricted lab. There, barely visible in the corner of the shot, Halston himself leaned against the doorframe, his head tilted at just the right angle to peer through the narrow window. His posture was casual, but his gaze was deliberate, hungry, measuring what he wasn't meant to see. Maya pointed at the screen, her voice tight with urgency. He wasn't just snooping, Keanu. He was watching. He wanted a look at the restricted prototype. Keanu leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. He watched the clip twice, then paused it on the precise moment Halston's reflection caught the faint glow of the device. For a long moment, Keanu didn't speak. Then he nodded once, slowly. "Exactly what I needed." Maya frowned. "What do you mean? This shows he trespassed, but it's just a glance. Will it even matter in court?" Keanu set his pen down and looked at her with calm certainty. "It's not about one glance. It's about the pattern. Combined with the stolen photos, this shows intent. That he came not to partner, but to steal. Every piece adds weight." Maya studied him, still amazed by his ability to stay steady when she felt her nerves unraveling. She shook her head. "You were waiting for this, weren't you? You knew we'd find something like this." Keanu's faint smile returned. "Truth leaves traces. Always." The clock ticked past 1 in the morning, but neither of them moved toward rest. Their battle wasn't measured in hours of sleep, but in details caught before dawn. And this detail, the CEO of TechCorp caught peering where he had no right, was about to become another stone in the wall Keanu was quietly building. For several minutes, silence filled the apartment. Only the faint hum of the city outside slipped through the thin walls. Marcus sat rigidly on the edge of the couch, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting someone to burst in. Keanu leaned against the window frame, his arms crossed, studying the man who had just shaken the foundation of his life. The weight of Marcus's confession, that Gerard Reeves was not Keanu's father and that Marcus himself shared that same bloodline, pressed heavy in the air. "You have to understand," Marcus began again, his voice lower now, the edge of desperation creeping in. "I didn't come here to ruin your life. I came here because mine is already ruined. Prison strips everything from you. Time, pride, even your sense of self. The only thing that kept me going was knowing I had someone out there who shared my blood. I'm not asking for forgiveness, not even trust, just recognition, just to not die alone." Keanu's chest tightened. He had faced betrayal, abandonment, and loss before, but this was different. This wasn't the world tearing someone from him. It was someone walking into his life carrying a truth so sharp it could cut everything he believed about himself. He thought of Gerard, the man who had hurt him, yes, but also the man whose shadow he had spent years trying to step out from. What did it mean if Gerard hadn't been his father after all? Did that rewrite his story, or did it only deepen the ache of confusion? "You waited until now?" Keanu finally asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "All these years, and you only come forward when you're desperate?" Marcus swallowed hard. "You think I didn't want to? You think I didn't dream of this moment every single day in that cell? But shame. Shame is a cage worse than steel. I thought I'd poison your life if I entered it. But when the doctor told me the cancer's spreading faster than they thought, I realized I couldn't die without trying, without at least giving you the chance to know the truth." The room seemed to close in, the silence unbearable. Keanu rubbed his temples, pacing slowly, his boots dragging against the floor. The faces of those he'd lost, his father figure, his sister Kim, his best friends, flashed through his memory. Loss had taught him to guard his heart, but something in Marcus's trembling voice carried a sincerity he couldn't ignore. Keanu stopped pacing and turned back. "If what you say is true, then we share more than blood. We share a lifetime of scars. But Marcus, truth demands proof. Words aren't enough." Marcus nodded instantly, pulling a folded paper from his pocket with shaking hands. "I thought you'd say that." He laid it gently on the table between them. "DNA results. I had them run months ago." Keanu stared at the paper but didn't reach for it. His heart thundered in his chest. Proof of a brother, proof of a rewritten life, sat within arm's reach, but reaching for it felt like reaching over a cliff. Keanu looked out over the crowd again, noticing faces he had not expected. A group of young students held up handmade signs that read, "Love heals" and "Forgiveness matters." Their eyes were bright, and their voices joined in a soft chant of his name, not as a celebrity, but as someone they believed stood for something larger. It was humbling, almost overwhelming, and it gave him the strength to continue. "Some of you may wonder why I'm sharing this so openly," he said, his voice steady now. "It's not easy to admit mistakes. It's not easy to stand here and talk about broken families, old wounds, and the times I failed. But if I've learned anything, it's that silence only deepens the hurt. We heal when we speak, when we reach out, and when we dare to let others see our scars." The weight of the moment hung over everyone, and even the press members lowered their cameras slightly, as though they too felt the sacredness of the confession. The world had seen Keanu as an actor, a fighter, a hero in fiction. But now, they were seeing the man who carried burdens like anyone else, who was willing to be small in order to show something greater. He paused, then allowed himself a small smile. "I don't know how the future will unfold. I can't promise perfect outcomes, but I can promise that I'll keep showing up. I'll keep working to rebuild what I broke, to honor the truth, and to fight for compassion in a world that often forgets how powerful it really is." Applause broke out again, but this time it was quieter, more reverent, like the sound of rain falling on leaves. It wasn't about the spectacle anymore. It was about a shared understanding that something honest had just been given, something raw and unguarded. As the applause faded, Keanu raised one last thought. "To those of you who carry secrets, guilt, or pain that you think makes you unworthy, please know you're not alone. Please know that forgiveness is possible. It won't erase the past, but it can transform the future. If you've ever been waiting for a sign to take that first step, maybe this is it." There it was, the plea not just for himself, but for everyone listening. It wasn't about clearing his name or controlling the narrative. It was about giving people a reason to believe in second chances. As the press conference drew to a close, the cameras did their work, but the headlines they would carry the next morning no longer mattered as much to him. What mattered was that he had stood up, spoken the truth, and offered something worth holding on to. And as Keanu stepped away from the microphone, he knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one built not on silence or fear, but on the fragile, unshakable power of truth and compassion. The courtroom buzzed with its usual morning energy, lawyers shuffling papers, reporters whispering in hushed tones, the gallery brimming with eager onlookers, waiting for another spectacle. Keanu Reeves sat quietly at the defense table, hands folded, his expression unreadable. He had spent the last night in preparation, but no one here knew it. To the judge, to Dalton, to Halston, he looked like a man on the verge of surrender. When Judge Thornhill called the session to order, her gaze landed firmly on Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, are you prepared to continue cross-examination of Dr. Monroe?" Keanu rose slowly, his dark suit wrinkled from long hours of wear, his papers stacked unevenly before him. He adjusted them with a deliberate slowness, then cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "I respectfully request a recess. I need time to reconsider my approach." A ripple of surprise swept through the gallery. Dalton leaned back in his chair, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. He leaned toward Halston, whispering just loud enough for a few in the front row to hear. "He's folding. Just watch." Halston smirked, nodding with smug confidence. "I told you. He's in way over his head." Judge Thornhill's brow furrowed, irritation flashing in her eyes. "Mr. Reeves, this is highly irregular. You've had ample opportunity to prepare. The court cannot indulge endless delays." "I understand, Your Honor," Keanu replied, his tone calm and respectful. "But in the interest of ensuring clarity and fairness, I believe a short recess is necessary. I assure you, it won't be wasted." Thornhill studied him for a long moment, her gavel poised in her hand. Then, with a sigh that echoed her frustration, she relented. "Very well. 30 minutes. No more." Dalton rose smoothly, bowing slightly toward the bench. "Your Honor, for the record, the plaintiff is ready to proceed without interruption. This delay only underscores the weakness of the defense's case." The judge shot him a look that silenced his theatrics. "Sit down, Mr. Dalton." Reporters were already on their feet as Keanu stepped away from the table. Cameras flashed, microphones stretched toward him the moment he crossed the courtroom doors. "Mr. Reeves, are you giving up?" one shouted. "Is this the end of your defense?" another pressed, their voice sharp. Keanu gave no speech, offered no headline. He simply nodded politely to each question, his face calm, almost serene, before moving past them. To the press, his silence was confirmation of defeat. Within minutes, the news feeds would light up with headlines declaring his collapse. But upstairs, in his rented office near the courthouse, a different story unfolded. Whiteboards lined the walls, covered in sprawling timelines, notes, and fragments of legal code. The prototype device sat on the desk, its casing polished, wires neatly coiled, waiting like a hidden weapon. Sophia Menon's emails, neatly printed and highlighted, lay stacked beside it, each one a dagger aimed straight at TechCorp's lies. Maya hovered by the desk, watching Keanu as he moved with calm purpose. He spread his notes across the table, arranging them in precise order, cross-referencing Monroe's testimony with Sophia's documentation. Every piece of evidence had its place now, every trap aligned for the next phase of battle. "You're really doing this?" Maya said quietly, her voice trembling with awe and fear. Keanu glanced at her, his eyes steady. "We've done the work. Now it's time to show it." She shook her head, pacing the room. "I watched them laugh at you in there. I watched the judge cut you off like you were a fool. But now," she gestured to the boards, the papers, the device, "now I feel like you've been holding back, waiting for something bigger." Keanu placed a hand on the demo device, his fingers brushing over the metal surface. His voice dropped, calm but resolute. "Not flip. Reveal." Maya stared at him, struck by the certainty in his tone. For the first time since the trial had begun, she felt the balance of power start to shift. The evening settled into a rhythm of quiet conversations and clinking cutlery. But the warmth around the table was fragile, like a flame threatened by the slightest wind. Keanu listened as Isabella spoke of her mother's paintings, of how they had once been displayed in a small gallery before life's burdens pulled her away from art. Her voice carried both pride and sorrow, every word weighted with memories she had kept buried for too long. "Art was her freedom," Isabella said softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "But freedom isn't something life always lets you hold on to." Her words sank into the air, pulling everyone into reflection. Keanu glanced at his mother, Patricia, who had grown uncharacteristically silent. Her expression carried the heaviness of someone remembering choices made decades earlier, choices that shaped not only her own life, but Keanu's as well. For a moment, the room felt suspended, caught between past regrets and the fragile hope of reconciliation. Matteo reached across the table, placing his hand gently over Isabella's. "She painted because she wanted to leave something behind," he said. "Something that proved she lived, that she loved." His voice trembled, but it carried a conviction that filled the space with an unexpected strength. Keanu felt the truth of those words deep in his chest. They reminded him of the many times he had held on to art, music, or film as a way to process grief and preserve the echoes of those he had lost. He leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "And she did," he said. "She left you. She left the spirit of what she created. And maybe that's why we're all sitting here right now, because of what she gave to the world, even if she never knew how far it would reach." Silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. It was the kind that made everyone breathe a little deeper, as though something buried had finally been acknowledged. Patricia's eyes glistened, though she quickly blinked away the tears. Isabella nodded, her shoulders loosening slightly, as though part of the weight she carried had been set down. The meal continued, but the tone had shifted. The laughter, when it returned, carried a sincerity that hadn't been there before. And though the table still held its share of unspoken words, there was now an unbreakable thread of connection weaving them together, one that hinted that healing, however slow, had begun. The courtroom returned to session with the usual chatter, but beneath the hum there was a different energy. Reporters whispered predictions of Reeves's surrender. Dalton leaned smugly against his table, and Edward Halston sat with the relaxed air of a man who believed the fight was over. Judge Thornhill adjusted her glasses, tapping her gavel once. "Mr. Reeves, you may proceed." Keanu rose from his seat, a stack of papers neatly arranged before him. His voice was calm, steady, almost casual. "Your Honor, the defense would like to call a witness." Dalton smirked, already shaking his head as if indulging a child. "Who could you possibly call, Mr. Reeves?" he muttered under his breath. Keanu's eyes didn't leave the judge. "I call Sophia Menon." The words struck like lightning. For a moment the courtroom froze, then erupted in gasps and whispers. Reporters fumbled for their pens, typing furiously. Halston's face drained of color as he shot a sharp glance at Dalton. Dalton sprang to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor, this is outrageous. Ms. Menon is bound by strict confidentiality agreements with TechCorp. She cannot testify without violating her legal obligations." Keanu turned toward him, his tone still measured. "Confidentiality agreements do not protect criminal activity. They are not shields for theft or fraud. If Ms. Menon was ordered to participate in illegal conduct, then her testimony is not only admissible, it is necessary." Judge Thornhill leaned forward, eyes narrowing as she studied Keanu. She tapped her pen against the bench, considering the argument. "Mr. Dalton, if what Mr. Reeves suggests is true, confidentiality would not apply, and the court is very interested in the truth." Dalton sputtered, his polished demeanor beginning to crack. "This is theater, Your Honor. He is parading in an irrelevant witness to stall—" "Enough, Mr. Dalton," Judge Thornhill cut in, her voice sharp. "Objection. Overruled. Proceed, Mr. Reeves." The bailiff opened the side door, and Sophia Menon entered. She looked small against the weight of the courtroom, her shoulders tense, her eyes scanning the crowd nervously. But as she walked to the witness stand, she carried herself with quiet determination. The oath was administered, and she swore to tell the truth, her trembling hands folded tightly together. Keanu approached gently. "Miss Menon, could you please state your former position at TechCorp?" Her voice was soft but clear. "I was a senior research scientist. I worked on the renewable energy division until I resigned 3 months ago." "And during your time there?" Keanu asked. "Were you familiar with the company's directives regarding prototype development?" Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I was instructed, along with my team, to recreate a design that we had not originated." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Keanu's expression remained steady, patient. "And where did that design come from?" Sophia lifted her eyes, finding strength in the silence. "From Mr. Reeves. From his lab. We were given photographs taken during Edward Halston's visit and told to reverse engineer his prototype. It was not our work, it was his." The courtroom erupted. Reporters leapt to their feet, typing furiously, the sound of keys filling the room. Gasps echoed off the walls. Halston's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the arm of his chair so hard his knuckles whitened. Dalton shot to his feet again, his voice rising. "Objection! Hearsay! This is unsubstantiated slander!" Judge Thornhill banged her gavel. "Order! Sit down, Mr. Dalton." Keanu waited calmly until the room quieted. Then he asked, "Miss Menon, do you have any documentation to support your testimony?" Sophia reached into her bag with shaking hands and withdrew a folder. She handed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. "These are internal emails, notes, and directives. They show the instructions we received from senior management. They also include timestamps of when the photos were distributed to us." Judge Thornhill opened the folder, scanning the top page. Her brow furrowed as her eyes moved across the lines. Then she looked up at Dalton. "Mr. Dalton, do you wish to contest the authenticity of these documents?" Dalton's lips parted, but for once no words came. His face flushed as he stammered, "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We need time to review." The judge silenced him with a glare. "You'll have your chance. For now, the testimony stands. Proceed, Mr. Reeves." Keanu gave Sophia a small nod, steadying her. "Thank you for your courage, Miss Menon. Just one more question. Why are you testifying today despite the risks?" Sophia's voice wavered, but her words were clear. because I could not stay silent knowing the truth. What TechCorp did was wrong, and Mr. Reeves deserves justice." Her answer struck the jury with quiet force. For the first time since the trial began, the fortress Dalton had built began to show cracks. Keanu remained at the edge of the candlelit room, his eyes fixed on the worn leather journal Isabella had carefully placed on the table between them. The air felt thick with memories, as though every page carried the scent of paint, dust, and laughter from years long gone. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she pushed the journal toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. She wrote in it almost every day until she left this house. Keanu hesitated, his fingers hovering above the cover. He could feel the weight of his mother's presence, as though touching it might summon her back into the room. Finally, he drew it closer and opened to the first page. The handwriting was delicate, full of flourishes that spoke of youth and dreams. His breath caught as he read the opening lines. Simple reflections on her childhood mornings in that very home. As he turned the pages, fragments of a life he had never known unfolded before him. Drawings of the small garden, notes about neighbors, even songs she had tried to write but never shared. It was more than just a journal. It was a window into a world his mother had kept tucked away, a world he had always longed to glimpse. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet, but his voice steady. This isn't just her memory. It's her truth. And now, it's ours to carry. Isabella nodded, silently placing her hand over his, sealing the moment with quiet understanding. The courtroom was unusually tense when Keanu Reeves rose from his chair. The laughter that had once greeted his awkward steps and fumbling objections was gone now. The gallery leaned forward, pens ready, cameras poised. Dalton adjusted his tie, trying to mask the unease that had been growing since Sophia Menon's testimony. Edward Halston, usually composed, gripped the edge of the table with white knuckles, as if bracing for a storm. Keanu walked to the center of the room, carrying a small remote. His dark eyes scanned the jury before he spoke. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present evidence, clear, direct, and undeniable." Judge Thornhill leaned forward, curious. The faint trace of condescension that had lingered since the start of the trial was gone. She nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Reeves." The lights dimmed as a projection screen lowered. Keanu pressed the remote, and grainy footage flickered to life. The jury watched intently as Edward Halston's aide, captured on a security feed, stood in the restricted section of Reeves Innovations lab. He angled his tablet, snapping covert photographs of the prototype. The images were undeniable. Frame by frame, the jury could see the aide shifting his position, capturing every angle of the circuitry. The timestamp in the corner aligned perfectly with the date of Halston's visit. Keanu let the silence stretch before speaking again. This was not a casual glance. This was deliberate, systematic. His voice was steady, but beneath it pulsed the quiet force of truth long withheld. Dalton leapt to his feet. "Objection! This footage is circumstantial at best. There's no proof the images were used for anything." Keanu cut him off, not with volume but with precision. "Not by themselves, no, but combined with what follows, they reveal the truth." He clicked again. On the screen appeared a split view. Reeves Innovations prototype schematics on the left, TechCorp's patent filings on the right. At first glance, the design seemed different, but Keanu's prepared overlays began to align the structures, line by line. Circuitry that had looked distinct now matched perfectly. The energy flow pathways, the unique modulation patterns. Each innovation Reeves and Maya had labored over appeared mirrored in TechCorp's design. When the overlays reached completion, the two designs were indistinguishable. Gasps erupted in the gallery, a journalist's pen clattered to the floor, one juror leaned forward, squinting as if unable to believe what they were seeing. Keanu let the images hold for a long moment before turning to the judge. These are not coincidences. They are replicas. Dalton tried again, his voice breaking under the strain. These so-called overlays could be manipulated. They're not admissible without expert validation. Sophia Menon's voice rang out from the witness stand, steady now with conviction. They're authentic. I worked on the copied files myself. What Mr. Reeves shows here is exactly what we were ordered to create. Dalton's face flushed, sweat beading on his forehead. He began flipping through his notes with frantic energy, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Keanu, unhurried, walked back to the table and retrieved the compact demonstration device. He set it on a stand in full view of the jury. Words can be doubted, images can be questioned, but proof that lives and breathes in real time cannot be denied. He tapped the power switch. The device hummed softly, lights glowing from within. A low whir filled the room as it projected a holographic model above itself, rotating gently. On one side appeared the original design from Reeves' innovations. On the other, TechCorp's alleged invention. As the two models spun, they merged, layer by layer, until they became one, indistinguishable, identical down to the smallest detail. The room erupted again, not with laughter this time, but with shock. Jurors exchanged glances, their earlier skepticism dissolving into stunned recognition. Even Judge Thornhill, who had once smirked at Keanu's fumbling performance, leaned closer, her expression sharpened with respect. Dalton sank back into his chair, his confident mask stripped away. Halston's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the armrest so hard it looked as though he might snap it in two. Keanu's voice cut through the silence with calm finality. This is not theory. This is fact. TechCorp did not create this technology. They stole it. Keanu stood frozen, his breath caught as if the air itself had thickened. The room, with its smoke-stained walls and half-collapsed ceiling, suddenly felt sacred. His eyes scanned the brittle envelope again, afraid that if he blinked, it might crumble away. His mother's name, written in Lucia's unmistakable script, seemed to echo through the silence. 1,000 memories pressed against him all at once. Lucia's gentle laugh, the way she hummed while folding laundry, the lullabies she used to sing in Spanish. He remembered nights when storms rattled the windows, and it was her voice, not the thunder, that filled his ears. She had been the quiet strength that had steadied his fractured childhood, the anchor when so much else felt adrift. Now, decades later, he held the last words she had ever intended for his family. His fingers trembled, not from fear but from reverence. This wasn't just a letter. It was a bridge across time. A final gift from a woman who had poured her life into theirs without ever asking for recognition. He lowered himself to the edge of the charred sofa, the springs groaning beneath him. Carefully, he traced the curve of the handwriting with his thumb, as though touching the ink itself could connect him to her one more time. His throat tightened. He thought of how his mother would feel if she saw this, how tears would surely fill her eyes, just as they were filling his now. Keanu whispered softly, barely audible, "Lucia, why now? Why after all these years?" His voice cracked, the words dissolving into the heavy stillness. He knew, deep down, that opening the letter would change everything. Whatever secrets it carried would not just belong to him, but to his entire family. And in that fragile moment, he realized he wasn't ready to keep it to himself. This was something he had to share. The tension in the courtroom had thickened to the point where every shuffle of paper sounded like thunder. After Keanu's devastating reveal with the holographic demonstration, Dalton knew he needed to reclaim control. His smirk was gone, replaced by the strained determination of a man fighting to salvage a collapsing case. He stood quickly, his voice louder than usual. "Your Honor, the plaintiff calls, Dr. Leonard Whitfield." A tall, bespectacled man in his 50s entered the witness stand, carrying himself with the poise of a seasoned academic. His resume had already been circulated. Professor of applied physics, published extensively, often cited in technical journals. Dalton leaned heavily on Whitfield's gravitas, projecting the image of authority and credibility. Once sworn in, Dalton wasted no time. Dr. Whitfield, based on your professional expertise, can you explain to the jury whether TechCorp's design is a direct copy of Reeves Innovations' prototype? He clasped his hands, his tone measured and confident. No, it is not. While there are surface-level similarities, there are also distinct differences in configuration and efficiency. For example, the orientation of certain circuits is optimized differently in TechCorp's design. These changes reflect independent innovation rather than duplication. Dalton nodded eagerly, glancing toward the jury as if Whitfield's words had already erased the sting of Sophia Menon's testimony. So in your expert opinion, Mr. Reeves's claim that his design was stolen is overstated? Whitfield adjusted his glasses. That is correct. Similarity does not imply theft. In scientific fields, overlap is common. What matters are the differences, and those differences are substantial. The gallery murmured, some nodding as though reassured. Dalton's shoulders relaxed a fraction. He turned toward Keanu with renewed confidence. Your witness. Keanu stood slowly, his calm presence a stark contrast to Dalton's fevered energy. He approached Whitfield with no theatrics, carrying only a single notepad. His voice was soft, almost conversational. Dr. Whitfield, Keanu began, you testified that there are differences between the two designs, correct? Yes, Whitfield answered readily. And you consider these differences substantial? Indeed. Keanu flipped a page in his notebook. Now, let's talk about the similarities, specifically the nano-coating process used to stabilize the energy unit. You're aware that both designs employ this? Whitfield paused. Yes, both utilize nano-coating. And this nano-coating, would you say it is an incidental feature, or is it integral to the success of the design? Whitfield hesitated, shifting slightly in his chair. It is important, certainly. Important, Keanu repeated, his tone steady. Without it, would the unit function as intended? Whitfield sighed. No, not effectively. Keanu nodded. So, regardless of circuit orientation or minor configuration adjustments, the core innovation, the nano-coating, remains identical in both designs. A silence fell. The jury leaned forward, sensing the shift. Whitfield's confidence wavered. Dalton shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor, leading the witness. Judge Thornhill raised a hand. Overruled. The question is clear. Answer it. Dr. Whitfield. Whitfield's jaw tightened. Yes. The nano-coating is the same. Keanu offered no gloating smile, no triumphant gesture. He simply continued, his voice level. Thank you. Now, one more question. In your professional experience, is it common for two independent teams to arrive at the exact same nano-coating formula, down to the molecular alignment, without collaboration or shared data? Whitfield looked down, his silence stretching. Finally, he admitted, it would be highly unlikely. The room erupted in whispers. The jurors exchanged glances, eyebrows raised. Dalton paled, fumbling through his notes, his carefully crafted defense unraveling with each word. Keanu stepped back, his notepad at his side. He looked neither pleased nor angry, only resolute. Piece by piece, the testimony had dismantled itself under the weight of truth. Judge Thornhill, who had once smirked at Keanu's clumsy beginnings, now studied him intently, her expression no longer dismissive but measured with respect. The room filled with a quiet hum as the machines around Helena blinked steadily, the rhythm of hospital life carrying on as though unaware of the human storm unraveling within its walls. Keanu remained seated by her bedside, his hand still holding hers, as if letting go might allow the weight of everything to crush her spirit. Helena's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she struggled to form words. Finally she whispered, "All these years, I thought I had nothing left of him. Nothing of the man I lost. And you've been carrying his presence with you, protecting it." Her eyes glistened, but they weren't only wet with sorrow. They carried awe, the kind that comes when the heart touches a truth too large to deny. Keanu gave her hand a soft squeeze, his own voice gentle. "He didn't leave you with nothing, Helena. He left you with everything. He left you with faith in love, with proof that the people we carry forward don't vanish. They transform. They stay alive in the ways we honor them." She looked down at the guitar, her frail fingers brushing across its scarred wood as though recognizing an old friend. The memory of her husband filled the room like a silent chord struck deep inside her. "I can almost hear him," she said softly. "As if he's playing here right now." Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe he is. For a long while they sat together in that stillness, Helena clutching the instrument, Keanu keeping her steady. The world outside might have been chaotic, filled with headlines, noise, and fleeting distractions, but in that hospital room, time slowed into something sacred. Helena turned her gaze back to him, fragile but steady. "Promise me one thing, Keanu. Don't just guard this guitar for me. Play it, share it. Let the world know that love doesn't die when bodies do, that stories and songs, they outlast us." Keanu nodded, his throat tightening. "I promise." The weight of the vow settled into his chest like a stone, not heavy with burden, but grounded with meaning. It wasn't only Helena's request, it was her husband's, echoing through time. And in Keanu's heart, he knew he had been chosen not by chance, but by something far greater. The courtroom was restless, anticipation thick in the air. After the collapse of Dr. Whitfield's testimony, Dalton had no choice but to call his last weapon, the man whose empire stood on trial. Edward Halston rose from his chair with the confident air of a titan who had weathered storms before. His expensive suit gleamed under the lights, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes carried the sharpness of a predator determined to survive. He took the stand as if it were his rightful throne, adjusting his tie before answering the oath with crisp precision. Dalton approached with deliberate calm, eager to rebuild his client's image. "Mr. Halston," Dalton began, "can you tell the court in your own words how TechCorp developed its energy unit?" Halston leaned forward, his voice smooth, trained. "Our company has invested heavily in renewable energy research for nearly a decade. The unit in question is the result of countless hours of work by dedicated teams. Any claim that we copied another's design is categorically false." "And these allegations made by Miss Sophia Menon?" Dalton asked, his voice pitched just right for the jury. Halston allowed himself a practiced frown, the picture of betrayal. "Ms. Menon was a disgruntled employee. She left under difficult circumstances, and I fear her testimony is an attempt to tarnish the reputation of a company she once served. Her accusations are false." Murmurs spread through the gallery. Dalton nodded, satisfied. "So, to be absolutely clear, you never authorized the use of outside designs?" "Absolutely not," Halston replied firmly. "TechCorp's work is entirely original. Any similarities are coincidental." Dalton smiled faintly, then turned to the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." It was Keanu's turn. He rose slowly, his calm demeanor unchanged. He approached the witness stand without theatrics, his notes tucked neatly in hand. When he spoke, his voice was soft but unwavering. "Mr. Halston," he began, "you testified that TechCorp's design is original, correct?" Halston nodded smoothly. "Yes." And you deny authorizing any photography during your visit to Reeves Innovations Lab? Halston's jaw tightened. Of course. I was there as a courtesy, nothing more. Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly. So you were not aware of your aide taking photographs of restricted equipment? The executive Dalton shot up instantly. Objection? Judge Thornhill raised her hand. Overruled. The witness will answer. Halston hesitated, then forced a dismissive smile. If an aide did something inappropriate, it was without my knowledge. Keanu nodded, as if expecting that answer. Very well, let me ask. Are you aware of Ms. Menon's sworn testimony, under penalty of perjury, that your team was directed to copy my design using those photos? Halston straightened, his expression carefully controlled. I am aware, and I reject it entirely. She is lying. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Keanu paused, letting the silence stretch, then continued. So, to be clear, you are denying not only my claim, but Ms. Menon's sworn testimony, the security footage, and the documented schematics? Halston's jaw flexed. That is correct. Keanu stepped closer, lowering his voice, the stillness in the room amplifying every word. Mr. Halston, would you please explain then how these documents exist? From his folder, Keanu pulled a set of pages and handed them to the bailiff. They were delivered to the judge, then passed to the witness stand. Halston glanced at them, his color draining. They were handwritten notes, his own signature scrawled across the corner, at the top of one page. Need to copy Reeves' design before he patents. The gallery gasped, a collective sound like the rush of wind through the room. Reporters scrambled to capture every word. Jurors leaned forward, eyes wide, while Dalton's face froze in horror. Halston's hands trembled slightly as he held the papers, his confident mask cracking for the first time. Mr. Halston, Keanu said quietly, are these your notes? The CEO swallowed hard, his lips parting, but no sound emerged. The conversation between Keanu and Isabella stretched gently, like two rivers meeting after running their separate courses. She began to share fragments of her own life, hesitant at first, then more openly as she realized he was truly listening, not with the impatience of a celebrity pressed for time, but with the quiet patience of someone who valued every word. Isabella spoke of her childhood in the same house they had just walked through. She described sneaking onto the staircase to listen to grown-ups talk in hushed tones, of her grandmother who baked bread every Sunday, and of how the war years had forced her family into difficult choices. Her voice cracked when she recalled her father's absence, a shadow that haunted her mother's eyes. Keanu listened, nodding slowly, his heart heavy with empathy. He saw in Isabella's memories the echoes of his own mother's struggles, the same weight of survival, the same stubborn courage. At one point, Isabella paused and touched the locket at her neck. She opened it and revealed a tiny, fading photograph inside. This was taken in the backyard of this house, she said softly. My parents, smiling, even when things were hard. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Keanu leaned closer. The photograph was small, but he could make out the resilience in their posture, the same resilience that now lived in Isabella's face. He felt a lump form in his throat. He realized that this wasn't just a house of bricks and wood. It was a vault of untold stories, each one etched with sacrifice and endurance. Isabella seemed to sense his thoughts. You came here for your mother, she said. But maybe you were meant to meet me too. Sometimes the past doesn't just reveal answers. It gives us connections we didn't know we needed. Her words sank deep. Keanu thought of his mother upstairs, her trembling hands brushing the faded wallpaper. She was reliving her beginnings, and here, right in front of him, was someone else tied to that beginning, someone who could fill in the blanks of family history and offer a perspective no archive could capture. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply sat with the weight of it, the air rich with silence that wasn't empty, but full of history, grief, and the strange grace of shared humanity. Finally, Keanu broke the silence. Would you consider sharing these stories with her? I think hearing them from you could mean more than you know. Isabella's lips curved into a small, tremulous smile. If she would like that, then yes, it would be an honor. Keanu felt a quiet warmth spread through him, as though fate had guided this meeting. The house had yielded its first true gift, not just relics of the past, but the presence of someone who carried the living memory of it all. The courtroom, already shaken by Edward Halston's collapse, felt charged with an almost electric energy. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards, jurors exchanged wide-eyed looks, and even Judge Thornhill sat forward in her chair, her earlier smirk long gone. She no longer saw Keanu Reeves as a stumbling amateur, but as a man who had somehow turned the trial into a crucible of truth. Keanu stood at the defense table, his notes neatly stacked, his demeanor calm. He waited for the murmurs to die down before speaking again. "Your Honor," he said softly, his voice carrying in the stillness. "There is one more matter the court must consider." Dalton, visibly shaken from Halston's implosion, forced a laugh that came out brittle. "What now, Mr. Reeves? Another dramatic revelation? Another so-called piece of evidence you've conjured at the last minute?" Keanu ignored him, keeping his eyes on Judge Thornhill. "Your Honor, the truth has been exposed. TechCorp stole my design. But this case isn't only about theft, it's about precedent. It's about whether corporations can continue to exploit innovation while crushing the very individuals who create it. And for that reason, I ask the court to consider a statute, one that has rarely been invoked, but is directly applicable here." Dalton frowned, trying to recover his rhythm. "Statute?" he said, scoffing. "This is a patent dispute, Reeves, not a lecture in jurisprudence." Keanu calmly opened a small, leather-bound book, well-worn with yellowed tabs sticking out from its edges. He flipped to a marked page and held it up for the judge to see. "The Innovation Protection Act, Section 47B." A ripple of confusion spread through the courtroom. Dalton blinked rapidly, rifling through his own binder of legal references, his face paling as the name failed to register. Keanu continued, his tone precise. "Section 47B states that if a company is found guilty of willfully appropriating the intellectual property of an independent innovator, the court has authority to ban that company from developing or profiting from any related technology for a period of no less than 5 years. The gallery gasped again, louder this time. The idea struck with force. Not only could TechCorp be exposed for theft, they could be barred from touching the very industry they sought to dominate. Dalton shot to his feet, his voice rising in panic. "Objection! Your Honor, this is absurd. That statute is archaic. It hasn't been cited in—" Judge Thornhill raised her hand. "Mr. Reeves, do you have the text?" Keanu nodded. He stepped forward and handed the marked page to the bailiff, who delivered it to the bench. Thornhill adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning quickly. The silence stretched until she finally read aloud. "Any corporate entity found guilty of deliberate intellectual misappropriation may, at the court's discretion, be prohibited from engaging in related development, production, or distribution for a term not exceeding 10 years and not less than 5. Her voice lingered on the words, as though she herself could scarcely believe them. She lowered the paper slowly, staring at Keanu with something close to astonishment. "Mr. Reeves, you're correct. This statute is valid law," Dalton stammered, his composure disintegrating. But Your Honor, that provision was intended for a different era. It hasn't been enforced in modern cases." Thornhill's eyes cut toward him sharply. "That does not negate its authority. If the statute is on the books, it is enforceable." The gallery exploded with sound. Reporters typed furiously, knowing they were witnessing not only the downfall of TechCorp, but the revival of a forgotten legal weapon. The words "historic ruling" appeared on half-written headlines glowing on laptop screens. Keanu remained calm, his voice quiet but resolute. "Your Honor, this isn't about vengeance. It's about ensuring that innovation remains protected. If Tech Corp walks away with only a slap on the wrist, others will follow their example. But if this court invokes Section 47B, it will set a precedent, a reminder that no company, no matter how powerful, can trample the rights of creators." The room seemed to lean toward him, as if gravity itself pulled everyone into his words. Thornhill tapped her pen against the bench, deep in thought, the weight of decision hanging heavily in the air. Dalton collapsed back into his chair, muttering to himself, flipping pages desperately, searching for an argument that wasn't there. The room seemed to close in on him as the truth lingered in the air. Keanu sat motionless, staring at the faded ink of the letter, his heart heavy with a strange mixture of awe and sorrow. For years he had walked through life carrying silent questions about the people who shaped his childhood, questions that never found answers. And now, through the fragile handwriting of his late nanny, a window had opened. Licia had written of moments he barely remembered, late nights when he cried as a boy, mornings when he struggled to fit into a world that often felt harsh and shifting. She described how she whispered stories in Spanish to soothe him, how she hummed lullabies when even sleep refused to comfort him. She had noticed everything, every small detail of his growing spirit. Yet between the lines there was more. She spoke of sacrifices he never knew she had made, how she had refused better-paying work to stay close to him, how she endured loneliness and silence so that he wouldn't feel abandoned. "You were not just the child of a famous name," she wrote. "You were my child too, even if the world never knew." Keanu blinked back tears. This wasn't only a letter. It was a confession of love, loyalty, and hidden pain. But there was also a thread of secrecy woven into it, as if she carried a story too heavy to speak aloud while alive. The final lines hinted at something greater. "One day, Keanu, when you find my son, you will know why I stayed, why I hid, and why my heart always belonged to two boys, not one." He exhaled shakily, the words echoing like a riddle in his chest. The letter wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, and it demanded he search for answers beyond memory. The courtroom buzzed with restless energy as the gavel came down for a recess. Judge Thornhill rose from the bench, her robe swaying as she gave a brief order. "Counsel, Mr. Reeves, Mr. Halston Chambers." "Now," the spectators murmured, but the bailiff quickly restored order. Reporters craned their necks as the key figures filed out. Keanu walked quietly, his face composed, while Dalton whispered furiously at Halston, who looked pale but still defiant. Behind them, Maya watched anxiously, her hands clasped tightly, praying her mentor's calm would hold in whatever storm was about to unfold. Inside Chambers, the air was thicker, more personal. Gone was the echoing grandeur of the courtroom. Here, the walls closed in, demanding honesty. Judge Thornhill removed her glasses, setting them carefully on the desk, then leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Gentlemen," she began, her tone brisk, "this case is rapidly shifting into dangerous territory for the plaintiff. Before we resume, I suggest we consider options outside a public ruling." Dalton seized the moment, turning to Halston. "Edward, listen to me. We need to settle, now. If she rules against us under Section 47B, we're finished. Not just this case, the entire division. We'll be barred from touching this field for years." Halston's jaw tightened, his pride flaring even as his hands twitched nervously. "No. I won't settle with him. Do you understand what that would look like? TechCorp bowing to an actor playing lawyer? I won't do it." Dalton's voice rose, desperation cracking through his polished exterior. "This isn't about appearances, Edward. This is survival. She's giving us an opening. Take it." Judge Thornhill raised a hand, silencing them, her gaze fixed on Halston, cool and unforgiving. "Mr. Halston, I'll be blunt. If I am forced to rule on this case, my decision will be devastating. The evidence against you is overwhelming. The statute cited by Mr. Reeves is clear. You stand to lose more than you realize." Halston shifted, his bravado faltering, but his ego refused to yield. "You don't understand, Judge. TechCorp cannot admit wrongdoing. Settling is as good as admitting guilt." Her eyes narrowed. "Perhaps because you are guilty." The words hung in the room like a hammer blow. Dalton looked away, ashamed, while Halston's face flushed crimson, his mouth opening but no rebuttal coming. Then Thornhill did something unexpected. She turned to Keanu. Her tone softened, her words slower, more deliberate. "Mr. Reeves, I owe you something. An acknowledgement. When you stood before me at the start of this trial, fumbling through your opening with papers spilling everywhere, I laughed inside. I thought you had no business here. I thought this was some performance, some foolish attempt by a man who didn't understand the weight of the law." She paused, her eyes steady on his. "But I was wrong. Today you've taught me something. You've reminded me that the law doesn't belong only to those with expensive suits and decades of practice. It belongs to truth, and to those brave enough to stand for it." The room grew still. Even Dalton, who had spent the trial sneering, seemed struck by her words. Keanu bowed his head humbly. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Your Honor, I never wanted to win a performance. I just wanted the truth to be seen." For a long moment, the chambers were silent. Judge Thornhill regarded him with something close to respect, genuine respect, the kind reserved for those who had fought with integrity rather than cunning. Dalton shifted uneasily, knowing the tide had turned completely. Halston, however, still glared, his pride clinging desperately to denial, even as the walls closed in around him. The following morning, Keanu rose earlier than usual, carrying the weight of his promise like a stone pressed into his chest. The farmhouse was still quiet, the sun just beginning to stretch its pale fingers across the valley. He poured himself a cup of coffee, but the warmth did little to calm the storm of thoughts inside him. Memories of his father flickered in fragments, moments of distance, moments of silence, moments that had shaped him in ways he hadn't fully understood until much later. Now, with Marcus standing at this same fragile threshold of fatherhood, Keanu felt an unspoken urgency. He stepped outside, finding Marcus already awake, splitting firewood with a rhythmic determination. Each swing of the axe was sharp, almost angry, as though Marcus was wrestling not just with the wood, but with himself. Keanu walked closer, watching for a moment before speaking. "You don't have to prove yourself to anyone out here," he said softly. Marcus paused, wiping sweat from his brow. His expression hardened. "Maybe I do. Maybe I've spent so much of my life taking, running, disappointing everyone that now I've got no choice but to prove I can be better." Keanu nodded, recognizing the edge in Marcus's voice. "I used to think the same thing," he admitted. "That I had to earn forgiveness, that maybe if I carried enough weight on my back I'd finally balance out what was broken. But the truth is, it doesn't work that way. You don't have to prove anything to me or to the world. The only thing you owe is honesty. To yourself and to your child." Marcus's hands tightened around the axe handle, his knuckles white. "And what if I fail? What if I can't give that kid the life they deserve? What if I end up just like our father?" The question cut deeper than the cold morning air. Keanu took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Then you try again. And again, until you learn that failing doesn't mean you've become him. It means you're human. The difference is that you don't walk away. You stay." That's the choice he never made. Silence lingered between them, heavy but not hostile. The wind carried the scent of pine, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out, its voice sharp and lonely. Marcus set the axe down, staring at the woodpile as though it held answers he couldn't reach. Keanu placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "You have a chance he never took. Don't waste it." For the first time since the confession, Marcus's eyes softened. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Enough to show that maybe, just maybe, he wanted to believe. The courtroom had become a place of silence and gravity. Every gasp, every murmur from earlier, had faded into something else now. An awareness that the end was near. The trial, which had begun with laughter at Keanu's expense, was about to close with the world's eyes fixed on him. Judge Thornhill adjusted her glasses, her tone crisp, but waited. "We will now hear closing arguments. Mr. Dalton, you may proceed." Dalton stood, but his movements lacked the polish of earlier days. His once confident stride had slowed into something almost reluctant. His shoulders sagged under the weight of everything the trial had revealed. The stolen designs, Sophia Menon's testimony, Halston's incriminating notes, the revival of a statute no one had expected. Dalton's usual flair, his charm, seemed to have deserted him. He cleared his throat, forcing a smile. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began. "What we've witnessed in this courtroom has been dramatic, yes, but drama is not evidence. My client, Tetcorp, stands accused of actions that are based more on sentiment than fact." His voice wavered slightly, but he pressed on. "Consider Sophia Menon. She claims to have evidence, but she is a former employee, bitter at her departure, motivated by resentment. Can such testimony truly be trusted? And these so-called notes, anyone could have written them. Anyone could have fabricated documents in this age of technology." The words sounded hollow, even to him. The jury's faces remained blank, unpersuaded. Dalton gestured toward Keanu, a last desperate attempt. "And let us not forget, the defendant here is not a lawyer, but an actor. He has played many roles in his career, and it is my firm belief that this courtroom performance is simply his most convincing role yet." A ripple of unease spread through the room, but not the kind Dalton wanted. His attempt to dismiss Keanu as a performer rang false in the face of everything they had seen. Dalton's voice faltered. He shuffled his notes, repeating phrases about reasonable doubt and business innovation, but his words landed with no weight. When he finally sat down, there was no confidence in his posture, no applause in the silence. His case had deflated, and he knew it. All eyes turned to Keanu. He rose slowly, not with grandeur, but with the quiet steadiness that had carried him through the trial. He carried no stack of notes, no binder of rehearsed lines. Only himself. He walked to the center of the courtroom, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. His eyes met the jurors, one by one, not with the piercing glare of a trained litigator, but with the open sincerity of a man who had nothing to hide. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice soft but clear, "I know I'm not supposed to be here, not in the way you expect. I don't have a degree in law. I don't have a firm of assistants or a wall of books behind me. What I do have is the truth. And that's all I've tried to show you." The jury leaned in, drawn to the simplicity of his words. He didn't rush. He let silence breathe between sentences, trusting the weight of honesty to carry more than rhetoric ever could. Keanu stood still, his breathing steady as the tension thickened around him. The lawyer smirked, certain he had the upper hand. His voice dripped with sarcasm as he said, "This isn't a movie set, Reeves. You can't charm your way out of the law." The audience chuckled nervously, but Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he adjusted his posture, his calm eyes fixed on the man who thought this was just another public humiliation. That stillness unsettled the courtroom more than any shouted rebuttal could have. Inside, Keanu replayed the lawyer's tactics, every interruption, every mocking jab meant to corner him. but he also remembered every kindness his mother had shown him when they were nearly penniless. He remembered nights when his family had no one to stand for them, no money for good representation, only faith that truth might prevail. That memory became his strength. When the lawyer finished another grandiose statement, Keanu finally leaned forward. His voice was measured, low, yet powerful enough to silence the scattered whispers in the gallery. "With respect, sir, the law is not your stage. It is the foundation that protects the voiceless. And right now, you're trying to twist it into a weapon of pride." The words carried a weight that the audience felt in their bones. Some leaned closer, realizing this wasn't the timid actor they expected. This was a man who had lived through hardship and understood justice far deeper than a man chasing billable hours. The judge shifted slightly, watching with renewed interest. He had seen many high-profile cases, but rarely had he witnessed someone command a room without theatrics. The lawyer tried to interrupt again, but Keanu raised a hand politely, refusing to be silenced. "I won't trade insults," he continued. "What I will do is remind this court of what's at stake. Families, futures, the truth that deserves to be heard." His tone wasn't rehearsed. It was lived experience, pulled from decades of carrying burdens the world never saw. A hush settled over the courtroom. The lawyer fumbled with his papers, his earlier smirk fading. Every attempt to look unbothered failed, because the room itself no longer belonged to him. Keanu's quiet authority shifted the balance, and for the first time the arrogant man looked uncertain. What followed wasn't a loud showdown, but a subtle unraveling. The audience began to murmur, but not in ridicule. This time, it was in awe. They had expected entertainment. Instead, they were witnessing conviction, humility, and a strange kind of moral clarity that couldn't be rehearsed or faked. The lawyer glanced at the judge, realizing too late that his grip on the narrative had slipped. Keanu remained composed, not basking in the shift, but simply standing firm in what he knew was right. The silence he created was louder than any performance, and the lawyer, who had laughed minutes earlier, now stood cornered by nothing more than truth spoken with dignity. The courtroom was so quiet it felt as though the air itself was holding its breath. Judge Margaret Thornhill, stern as ever, lifted her gavel but didn't strike it. Instead, she adjusted her glasses and looked directly at the jury, then at the lawyers, and finally at Keanu. Her voice rang steady. "After careful review of the evidence, testimony, and applicable law, this court finds that TechCore Industries willfully misappropriated the intellectual property of Reeves Innovations. Therefore, TechCore's patent claim is invalidated in full. Furthermore, under the authority of the Innovation Protection Act, Section 47B, TechCore is hereby prohibited from engaging in the development, production, or commercialization of similar technologies for a period of 5 years." The words dropped like thunder. Gasps rippled through the gallery, reporters scrambling to record every syllable. Judge Thornhill didn't pause. Additionally, damages are awarded to Reeves Innovations in the amount of $20 million. Finally, due to evidence of deliberate fraud, this court is referring the matter to the United States Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation of TechCorp's executives, including Mr. Edward Halston. The courtroom erupted in sound. Some gasped in disbelief, others whispered in awe. Cameras clicked rapidly as reporters rushed from the room, their headlines already forming. "Keanu Reeves stuns court with legal genius." Halston slumped in his chair, his face drained of all color, his empire collapsing around him in the space of a few sentences. Dalton muttered under his breath, gathering his papers in a daze, the fight long gone from his eyes. Sophia, seated behind Keanu, covered her mouth in shock, her body trembling with relief. Maya's hands clutched her notepad as tears welled in her eyes. Judge Thornhill leaned back, her gaze settling once more on Keanu. The smirk that had marked their first encounter was gone. Her expression was solemn, almost reverent. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice softer now. "I underestimated you. That was my mistake." Keanu bowed his head, his humility unbroken even in victory. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I didn't come here to win. I came here to stand for what's right." For a long moment, Thornhill simply studied him, perhaps seeing not just the actor or the accidental lawyer, but a man who had carried truth into a place that too often lost sight of it. Then she struck her gavel. "This court is adjourned." Outside, the courthouse steps became a battlefield of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Reporters swarmed, microphones extended. The crowd pressed close, desperate for a statement. Keanu stepped forward, Maya and Sophia just behind him. "Mr. Reeves," one reporter shouted, "how does it feel to defeat one of the most powerful corporations in America?" Another called out, "Do you plan to pursue more cases? Will you become a lawyer now?" Keanu raised a hand gently, quieting the chaos. His voice was calm, the same steady tone that had carried him through the trial. "I didn't come here to win. I came here to stand for what's right. This was never about me. It was about protecting the work of honest people from those who steal. Justice must mean something, or it means nothing at all." The words struck like an echo across the plaza. The cameras flashed, the microphones surged forward, but Keanu offered nothing more. He turned away, guiding Maya and Sophia down the steps, leaving the frenzy behind. Inside the courthouse, Thornhill remained in chambers, the faintest trace of a smile touching her lips as she considered how a case that began with ridicule had ended in history. Keanu stepped closer to Isabella, lowering himself slightly so his eyes met hers, without any sense of pressure. "You've been holding this for a long time, haven't you?" he asked softly. The folded letter in her trembling hands seemed heavier than paper, as though it carried decades of silence and sorrow. Isabella gave the smallest nod. "I wanted to give it to you the day your mother left this house. But she was crying so hard, and you were just a boy. I thought maybe one day, when you were grown, I'd find the courage." Her voice cracked, and she pressed the envelope against her chest. Keanu felt a tightening in his throat. He had spent his life piecing together fragments of his childhood, always wondering about the unanswered questions, the moments that seemed blurred or incomplete. Now, before him, was a woman who had witnessed it all and chosen silence, for reasons he was only beginning to grasp. "Why now?" he asked. His words carried no accusation, only the quiet longing of a son who had waited unknowingly for this truth. Isabella's eyes shimmered. "Because you came back. Because fate brought you here, into this room where your mother once dreamed, and because—" "I don't have much time left." The room went still. Outside, the faint chirping of cicadas filtered through the old shutters, a reminder of the world carrying on, even as everything within the walls felt suspended. Keanu reached out gently, his hand hovering for a moment before resting over hers. "Then let's read it together," he said. His voice was steady, but inside, waves of anticipation and fear churned. Isabella hesitated, then finally placed the envelope into his hand. The paper was fragile, browned at the edges, the ink slightly faded. On the front, written in a familiar yet distant hand, was his mother's name. His heart clenched. He slid his finger beneath the brittle seal, careful not to tear the contents. Isabella's breath hitched as he unfolded the letter, and for a brief moment, both seemed afraid of what the words might reveal. The handwriting flowed across the page in graceful lines. His mother's handwriting. Keanu's chest tightened, as if she were suddenly in the room again, her presence woven into every loop and curve of the ink. He began to read aloud, his voice quiet but unshaken. "My dearest Isabella, if you are reading this, then I was too afraid to speak these words aloud." The sentence trailed into silence as Keanu stopped, his voice breaking. Isabella's hand covered her mouth, tears streaming freely now. It was only the beginning, yet the letter already carried the weight of secrets that had shaped both their lives. Keanu closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. "Whatever is in here," he whispered, "we'll face it together." Setting his soul, and with that, he continued to read.